Hi guys, welcome to everyone joining us physically today, and everyone joining us on Zoom. We'd like to, welcome everyone to Silverleaf Investments. But if you move that, then we are this is weird to my controls. Okay. So by way of introduction, my name is Silverleaf, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Active Group for Africa Cannabis Advisory. In a nutshell, we are a services provider specialized in the African cannabis industry, working with a broad range of stakeholders, governments, corporates, entrepreneurs, research institutions, and our focus is on assisting in the commercialization of this industry. We form part of an international alliance under a brand called Global Code, which is headquartered in California and founded by Paul Rosen, who is who's a pioneer in the cannabis industry. He listed the first cannabis company on the Nasdaq, which is Kronos Group, which is a $6 billion company. We are very, very excited to delve into Silverleaf Investments today, unpack the thesis behind the fund, and also unpack the industry, the cannabis industry, where we are today, and what makes us excited about where this industry is going. So to kick off, I'd like to introduce the joint CEOs of Silverleaf, Pierre van der Hoven firstly, and Flip. So a little bit of background on Pierre. Pierre has over 30 years of business and entrepreneurship experience with a strong focus on media. His career started at SABC, where he held various financial and strategic positions. Pierre is actually a founder and a key player in setting up a number of media companies, including ETV, YFM, Yoroma FM, BTM, and SA Direct, which is a TV channel on Sky in the UK. Since 2016, Pierre has shifted and focused strongly on cannabis. So Pierre has been someone who has been monitoring the evolution of this industry, has been a key participant in the development of this industry, contributing in the way of research, thought leadership, and being an enabler to many participants and communities in the cannabis industry. He's been involved in a number of operational cannabis businesses, including his company called African Biz, which is a vertically integrated cannabis company, and Bovab International, which is a cannabis consultancy. Pierre is a qualified CA and a qualified chartered marketer. He holds an MBA from Indy in the UK, and there's a very long list of other qualifications and positions, but that's a good summary, I think, of Pierre. Cliff, welcome, Cliff. He's a serial entrepreneur who has been incubating and launching ideas with experience in cannabis, property, and technology. He's the founder of Leaflo, the world's first African verbal smoking blends, and is the co-founder of Canna Trade Africa, which is a holding company of the green side. Pierre is also the co-founder of Taste of Cannabis, where he's responsible for product sourcing and development and building the wholesale and online presence of the company. His expertise range from sales, marketing, business development, and Pierre has an extensive network of professionals in the cannabis industry, both locally and internationally. He's also a member of the industry non-profit organization Fields of Green for All, which has been very famous in the activism space in South Africa, being instrumental in the constitutional court judgment that that made the private use of and consumption of cannabis legal in South Africa. He's also the co-founder of the Cannabis Trade Association of Africa, which is a voluntary association for industry companies and professionals aimed at facilitating trade in cannabis. So welcome, Pierre, welcome, Cliff. Very excited to be unpacking the cannabis industry with you today and deep diving into Silverleaf and the investment sort of opportunity here and where we see things developing from here.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So I think just to kick things off, I'd like to unpack what's changed in the last 5 years. Cannabis went from a crop that was associated with criminality, with issues around gangsterism, with being viewed as a gateway drug, to the industry today having billions of dollars in listed value that has been applied into medicine, into wellness, into industrial materials. What's been the big shift that we've seen over the last couple of years that has really opened this industry up? Pierre, maybe you can kick off.
Yeah, I think we need to go back about 80 years. Cannabis is a revered plant across all continents, across religions, across cultures. But the most bizarre story you'll ever come across, it was driven underground. And South Africa, we have the dubious honor of being the people who voted to declare it of no use to mankind. And it became a criminal activity across the world. In the last couple of years, people have realized that this is just a lie. It's just not true. And what's driving the cannabis industry was primarily the recognition of the medical benefits of cannabis. The Canadians sort of spearheaded the legalization process, which is largely driven around politics. In fact, in the last USA election, cannabis was a very important electoral item. In fact, 6 states got legalized. So legalization and the changing stigma of cannabis is really driving it, and the commercial world has jumped onto it. So the Canadians are way ahead of the world. They've got a stock exchange, and they've created billion-dollar companies. So we're following the trend, but we're following the trend as a major player. South Africa's got a very special place in cannabis and a very bright future, but that's kind of really what's changed is the recognition of medical benefits and the changing stigma. Are the 2 big driving forces.
And then over 30 countries have now legalized for medical use. And I think it's a case of moving, like it was 100 years ago when it came to alcohol, from prohibition to becoming a legal, investable industry. And it really is, it's a big trend, but it's traditionally been about, as you said, smoking and stigma and in the shadows. And it's coming out of that now because it's really 3 uses. It's the recreational, it's the medical, and America was also instrumental in getting that going. In the late 90s, I was there when it started kind of opening up, and then dispensaries, and then the industrial side of it, with unbelievable application for this plant that's going to touch on so many industries. And when it comes to hemp, it's a whole new crop that's now being released. And I use the example of corn. Imagine if 100 years ago corn was made illegal. You wouldn't have corn syrup, we wouldn't have cornflakes, we wouldn't have so many other products that are derived from maize. And it's now a case of hemp is free, hello world, here it is. And that's why we're so excited about this industry. And it's very much a case of cannabis's time has come.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, the cannabis industry seems to be moving at different paces in different parts of the world. So we know that Canada has been a sort of a leader, as you mentioned here, really leading the capital markets sort of activity in the space. A lot of the Canadian companies have been on the front foot in terms of acquisitions and positioning themselves. We've seen quite a few deals actually happening in Lesotho, for example, with Canopy Growth investing sort of around 30 million Canadian dollars into that industry. And South Africa is, it feels like we're starting to sort of warm up and get excited about the industry. So what's your viewpoint about South Africa's place in the development of this industry and versus other parts of the world that seem to either be way ahead of us and in some instances still asleep? Where does South Africa kind of fit into this evolution?
Yeah, so South Africa is in a very strange position. In one sense, we are ahead of the world. We're one of the few countries who declared private use of cannabis a constitutional right. On the other hand, adult use in terms of an industry has already been legal. It's still illegal. And then we've got the grey area around hemp. There were some hemp permits issued by SAPRA during last year, but currently hemp is hanging in the air. We've been told from a very reliable source that by mid-February, which is hopefully next week, we'll have a new regime for hemp where hemp permits will be issued and we can launch the hemp industry. So we're a little bit schizophrenic in it. We've also, COVID hasn't helped us, and the efficiency of our own government hasn't helped us. So we've got a lot of things to catch up on. And it's absolutely critical that we do. We have a huge illicit industry. Estimates are we supply 30% of the world's smokable cannabis, and we have for the last 100 years. It comes out of Transkei, comes out of KwaZulu-Natal and Lesotho and Swaziland. So on the one hand, we've got a developed industry, but that's illegal. On the other hand, we have personal rights better than everywhere else. With medical, we had a very slow start. There was a bill passed about 4 years ago, I think now, so you could apply for a license to cultivate cannabis for medical use only under license from SAPRA. Everybody got very excited around that, but it's also been marred with delays and changing rules and that kind of stuff. But we at that point now. I think SAPRA started to get their act together at the end of last year. We know that a whole lot of licenses were issued at the beginning of this year. So I think we're getting there. But we're not moving quickly enough. The other side of it is the financial community are hamstrung because cannabis is still illegal at a federal level. So for some of our banks to jump into cannabis, it's not possible. They're restricted by legislation in the US. That's going to change, and there's a lot of talk now about cannabis being legalized at a federal level in the US within 18 months, and that would provide a massive boost to the industry. So we're really excited about that. So we're at the cusp, but we're not out of the woods yet. We've got Lesotho, you mentioned. There's a lot of African countries are piling into this industry. They've got an interesting model. If you cooperate with government, you get a license. If you're a citizen and you're caught with cannabis, you get locked up. It's not a very nice model, in my opinion. And we're moving on front. So I think it's a very exciting time. The big market is the adult use market, and we don't have anything on the horizon around that. And importantly, from a South African perspective, is between hemp and adult use. That's where we can feel the industry from the bottom and involve the small black farmers. So, my message to government is let's move and let's move really quickly. And the message to the rest of the investment community is finally there's a structure. So one of the other issues was there was no real investment vehicle, credible investment vehicle to enter the industry. Hence, Silverleaf. So we're trying to fill one of those gaps where there's a place to enter the industry, a lot of people are interested. So, that's kind of an overview.
But just also in terms of why South Africa is the right country, besides what you're saying, in terms of how much we export, how well positioned we are, we've got the right climate, we've got good soil, clean air, obviously not in metropolitan areas, but South Africa is also a very respected agricultural country. In terms of our exports, people are happy to do business with us. Zimbabwe, not so much unless you walk out with bags of gold. And our input costs are low, and they're low compared to many other places. Look at Canada, where obviously, as Pierre was saying, it's widely open. They've got these very expensive greenhouses because they're in winter for a huge part of the year. We get 8 months of summer in most parts of this country. And as a low cost base, we can become a real production engine for the world. But it's not just about turning all of us into farmers. We need to add value to the product as well and process it here. Because that would be the worst for us to see. It's like it is in Nigeria, where they extract the oil, they send it elsewhere to process it, and then they buy it back. And that's what's happening right now. That's the tragedy of the CBD industries. I've got stores, shopping malls around the country where it imported a CBD to process into products, when it could be growing it and at a lower cost base, putting it into the value chain. Yeah? And then the net export opportunities are huge with brand-based costs, dollar-based income. But the world's not waiting for us. It's a key message. Right? We have to get this industry going and get going quickly. And that's another reason why we launched the fund was a lot of the small companies that we're coming across, they're passionate, they're capable people, but they now need additional runway and funding as well as some activities to help them get to the next stage.
Brilliant. Now, the cannabis industry, if we sort of look at for example, the listed market of cannabis. So, with Canada introducing sort of full legalization in 2018, we saw these listed companies basically go from almost no valuation. An example of canopy growth almost reaching 30 billion in a matter of months, and then that sort of we saw that correct all the way down to sort of in the single billions. Now, 2021 has started with cannabis companies doubling in valuation and size. It feels like the momentum in the industry has picked up again. So it's quite clear that so far it's been a very volatile journey. But it feels like the tailwinds are building up for the industry at an international and a local level. Can you chat to us about why the timing of Silverleaf's fund being set up at this point in time sort of coincides very well with some of the international and local developments in this industry?
Yeah, so as you correctly point out, there was this listing frenzy, and it was a bit of the old resource guys playing finance games, raising capital at R5, and the moment it hits 10, exiting. So the cannabis industry went through that. Late 2019, there was the correction, which, a lot of us in the industry were quite unhappy about that. But in retrospect, it was fantastic because it cleared the air. The companies, it's about revenue, for example. A lot of them are trading at massive multiples with hardly any revenue. So that correction has now happened. The really big change is the public sentiment in America went from around 54%, and I think it's now sitting at 67% public support for legalization. So it became a political thing. And the US election was, as I say, run on many areas on the cannabis ticket. So it's normalizing now. And then came COVID. Now COVID's changed the world, as we know. It's made us more health conscious, more local. There's a lot of work being done around cannabis as a medicine for COVID. I'm not saying it cures COVID, but there's a work being done around that. And the consumption of cannabis went through the roof. I think it grew in certain states up to 40%. The Canadian market has also matured now. It's gone from an adult use and medical market, and now we're getting into edibles. Now, edibles coincide with this health conscious thing. People don't want to take smoke and put it in their lungs, but they want some of the medical benefits. So now it's different delivery mechanisms. It's through capsules, cookies, gummy bears. So I think it's a natural progression. And what you're seeing at state level in America is just absolutely unbelievable. States are legalizing, and within a month they're doing these unbelievable numbers. So I think it's, again, cannabis time has come. South Africa could have been part of that wave. We delayed it a little bit, but we're going to now be part of that wave. And as I said, we have a constitutional court hearing ruling. We have medical, which is really starting to happen now. We have hemp, which is about to be legalized. So I think we're at the bottom of the curve.
And just on that point, new industries in particular, typically go through S-curves and multiple S-curves. Pierre and I have both been in other industries before, both on the internet, both cell phones and software, so we've seen this movie before. There's a lot of M&A activity, there's a lot of buyouts and consolidations. But I think we're now coming out, also in Canada and the US, they're coming out of the bottom of that S-curve. I saw Tilray's, like you were saying, Tilray's gone up, it's 100% in the last week, so it's definitely coming back. And South Africa's just starting to go up the first step.
So just to finish off that point, there are people, and I happen to be one of them, that believe that cannabis will be the biggest industry in the world. It can replace fossil fuels. Okay, and that's a pretty big industry. And then you're not even getting into paper, you're not even getting into medicine. Adult use is a massive industry. So if the assumption is this is going to be the biggest industry in the world, and we're actually coming off a very low base. This has got to be the best time ever to get into cannabis. If you just find your little niche, and that's what we're doing when we're looking at our qualifying companies, if they pass the criteria and they're good at what they do in their niche, whatever it is, if they're good at what they do, the momentum in the industry will sweep them up. So partly, that's why we're launching the fund. And the possibility exists, as I said earlier, when the American money is finally opened up, we'll get checkbooks coming in here. So it's we're going to talk a little bit about 12J, and there's a 5-year window. But I think the timing is so good now, we could exit an investment in 3 years. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying it's a very real possibility, because when the big corporate guys arrive, they don't want startups. They want cash flows. They want management. They want corporate governments and valuations. When you've got a dollar checkbook, really not the most. We've seen it with canopy growth in this city. So I think we're really at a really good time to get in at the bottom, prepare a good mix of qualifying companies across the value chain, not just cultivation. I mean, cultivation is the focus now, but it's just because that's what's happening now. But talk to Cliff about brands at the retail side and explosion of CBD, and the timing is great.
And we also saw a recent transaction happening in that space with Distill, the alcohol company, saying, hang on a second, alcohol's on the decline, tobacco's on the decline, cannabis is coming up. So they've made a recent acquisition into a local CBD brand. And I think we're only going to see more and more of that. So our intention is to start prepping companies for that exit time and helping them professionalize and helping them find out additional runway.
Excellent. Now, cannabis is quite an interesting plant or crop, because there's so many verticals that it touches on. You've got medical cannabis, where we saw sort of a week or so ago, Jazz Pharmaceutical acquiring GW Pharma for $7.2 billion, which I think we're starting to see a shift of conventional pharmaceutical companies moving into the space. You've got the wellness space, which is very much led by cannabidiol, or CBD, which is an extract from cannabis, which is not psychoactive, but is known to have immense health benefits. You've got the recreational, where, for example, in the US, the thesis is that if you can modulate the consumption of cannabis in the same way that you can consume alcohol, so in other words, you have a drink with a low dose of THC, the component that gets you high, you can actually modulate how you feel as you consume cannabis, which can then be a substitute for alcohol, much healthier, taking a lot of strain out of the fiscal burden on healthcare and so forth. And then you've got industrial hemp, where you've got the materials, the material which can be a substitute to hydrocarbon materials. It's got a four times higher CO2 absorption factor than almost any other plant in the world. So you've got a multiple number of places that a mature cannabis industry is expected to disrupt.
Just make one comment on that. It
Sure.
grows in 4 to 5 months. 1 acre of hemp gives you the equivalent in terms of paper of 4 acres of forest. Those are unbelievable stats.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very exciting plant. In fact, I was at a music studio in Cape Town a couple of weeks ago that's built with hempcrete, because it's also got very good insulation properties. And the tragedy is that they were bringing the hempcrete in from Germany.
Oh, wow.
Producing it.
Exactly. So you've got this plant that has got an immense amount of potential to disrupt multiple industries. How are you guys sort of thinking or looking at investment opportunities across such a broad spectrum of potential areas in cannabis for South Africa and moving forward as the industry evolves?
So just before I talk about the value chain, let me just make a comment about some of the movements in the market. If you want to know what's happening, follow the money. So what we've seen is a very, very strong pharmaceutical lobby blocking cannabis. If you go into the difference between opioids and opiates and the ability to produce patents, there's a long history about why it was bad. But Canopy Growth was a beverage company. came from the Corona brand, which I always find quite ironic, or bought into category growth. And the latest one is Big Pharma is now has now bought out Jazz Pharmaceuticals, as you just pointed out. So I think people are realizing that keeping this genie in the box it's game over now. Okay, so now it's time to play. So I think the $7.2 billion valuation of a cannabis company is phenomenal in itself. But I think what's significant is that it's a pharmaceutical company now saying we're diving into cannabis. So it's almost tacit endorsement in a way. If we think about the value chain very, very simply, it's cultivate, process, manufacture, distribute, retail, and then related services. So we've identified qualifying companies in all those verticals. Cultivation is the one that's dominating now, and I'll use an example, is some complications. So yes, let's say 2 weeks time, the hemp permits, great, lower barrier to entry. You don't have to go EU GMP, you don't have to spend 20 million per facility, let's go. But the problem is, if you don't have a processing factory, it's pointless growing the crop. So we're in this timing issue of building the value chain. But besides that, we can, that can become a very long debate. We're looking at cultivation operations. We're looking at processing. These are extraction plants or decortication factories. The support services around that, which are laboratories, testing facilities, growing nutrients, pots. Some of the industry exists. So the greenhouse industry exists. The fertigation systems exist, but the cannabis-specific nutrients don't exist. So the elements of the services industry that are now being filled up, and we're seeing it all over the place. If you get further down the value chain, we've got a bit of a retail situation happening. Cliff's business is one of them, but it's CBD only.
Yeah, we always say to people that come to the kiosks that we have that it's cannabis decaf, cannabis light. Many people ask us, where does the big stuff come? So business moves much faster than government, and it's our opinion that in the next 2 years we will see adult use being opened up.
So retail's developing quickly, and if you can make it in the CBD market, there's no reason you shouldn't kill it in the CBD and THC market. We got some other interesting things I didn't mention earlier. There's the Haze Club, which is a very interesting cultivation model using the private use routes. So they're saying, I've got the right to cannabis, but I don't have a place to grow it. So I go to somebody else and I say, you grow it for me, I'll pay you a fee, and that plant belongs to me. And that's currently gone to court. So that may open up another whole adult use market. So, the interesting thing about this industry is it's changing fast, but the message is very simple. Get in early, and the growth of the industry will take you along. And as far as Silverleaf's approach is, it's to invest in qualifying companies across the value chain. And we're not going to do that. We have to be in every element of the value chain. Qualifying company first, and then say which part of the value chain are you in. And where we are now is we haven't decided that there's any part of the value chain we're going to avoid.
And also in terms of criteria of how we're going to evaluate the companies, obviously because it's a funding play, from the other industries and from our people's experience from our team members, that it's so critically important to back the jockey and to find an operational management team that know how to execute. And obviously the business model and the idea has to be sound, but we've put together quite a strong investment committee. In fact, the guy who used to run Canada Growth Africa is part of our investment committee, so he totally understands the economics of the landscape. And the intention is to put these qualifying companies through a set of criteria, a filtering mechanism, because I think Pierre might have mentioned it, we're getting inundated with saying, I've got an idea, or I've got a small business, how do I scale it up, how do I fund it, how do I participate in the fund? But right now, our focus is very much on the raise, and then we'll get to the qualifying companies.
Oh, brilliant. And I'm also glad to be part of the investment committee of the fund, so really excited about that.
So can I talk a little bit about some of the 12J issues? So if we just visit that briefly. So you invest your money now before the end of February. You get a full tax deduction. You get a second chance for provisional taxpayers in August. you get the full tax deduction, you're locked in for 5 years. If we go back a step, why was 12J created? It was created by the government to provide an incentive for small and medium enterprises. It was deliberately set up, and it was deliberately set up to lock in capital for 5 years. That doesn't mean we as a management company or as a fund can't exit an investment within the 5 years. It means the investor can't get paid back within the 5 years or there's a tax deduction. Our job is then to identify qualifying companies. We've put together a team. There's Daryl sitting in the audience here. We've got a couple of guys, I see that all online. And the expertise is very much to bring the cannabis guys together with the corporate guys. We've got Jeff at the back there. Jeff administers through his company, Grovest, I think up to 50 funds. So he's forgotten stuff we haven't even learned. But we know a little bit about cannabis. So we deliberately constructed our team so that we can evaluate and choose the correct qualifying companies. So we've got some restrictions. We want to invest in cultivation, but choose a number. A cultivation operation costs 20 bob. We want a minority stake. Let's say we want to put 10 million in. We can invest no more than 20% in any one operation, which means we can't touch a cultivation operation unless we've raised 100 million. So we have our own restrictions, and at this point, we don't know how much money we've got to work with. What we do know is a lot of people in the cannabis industry are going to be early stage investors. So the other guys in our team are very experienced in terms of incubation. So we're going to take companies that we believe in, or we believe in the people, which is very important to us. There's a horse and the jockey, and we're really about the jockey. The horse, we know, this cannabis thing is a fast race. The horse is going to be okay if it's got good management. But if they're not investment ready, what do we do? So we've got a structure where we can incubate, help prepare companies, invest in them in early stage. Yes, it may be a smaller amount, but the more money we get into our business, the more scope we've got to invest. So in a funny way, we're at the hands of our investors, okay, on the one hand. And on the other hand, what we want to do is to take these businesses, get them investment ready before we invest, and then look at partnering. If we want to get up to big unit numbers, or we've got big acquisitions, we're talking to other funds. So we may get into an alliance where we can work with another VC who's interested in cannabis but doesn't have the cannabis expertise. So we may co-invest. That's something we're looking at very carefully. And then on the other side, we're trying to lower the barrier to entry. There's a lot of young people, you say cannabis, and they say yes, okay? Maybe they've got some money to invest. Our current investment minimum amount is 50,000 Rand. So we're talking to a company who's got a trading operation where we can drop that unit amount and we can lower the barrier to entry. So we're going to wait and all of you will be getting a message on the 28th of February saying, hey guys, we've raised X amount of money. Then we go into the evaluation process and we start evaluating qualifying companies.
And both Pierre and I are very adept at local industry as well as globally. I know that he's spent time with global conferences as have I, got deep network international. And then also just coming back to the opportunities for South African companies. Right now I'm engaging with somebody in Hong Kong who's looking to distribute CBD products into that region, and there's huge export opportunities. So a lot of the companies that we're looking to invest in want to get enough for export as well, in which case our team's got some experience on that side. It's pretty big.
Brilliant.
That was a good point. The lights went on. Just around that, can I also just support Chris? Cliff here. One of the very interesting things about cannabis, rand-based costs, dollar-based revenue, which for our country I think is a very exciting opportunity, and it makes a lot of sense. We just need to make our cost structure a positive. We need to understand that we don't want to be turned into farmers. We want to beneficiate, we want to add value, and we want to share some of those benefits. So we don't want to race to the bottom and become the low-cost producer while all the profits sit overseas. We don't want to do that. We must not do that as a country or as an industry. But it's a nice place to be when you're spending in rands and you're earning in dollars.
And South Africans are very innovative, which geez, I've never seen an industry move so fast. So many incredible products just arrive on the scene and you can buy. That's already happened, and it's exciting. Exciting time to go.
Excellent. Now, in terms of the government's viewpoint on this industry, we heard Cyril Ramaphosa communicate to the country that this is a priority industry, and he sees the potential for this to contribute towards job creation, economic and rural development. How is Silverleaf's investment thesis or viewpoint aligning with the objectives of West South Africa? We've obviously got a huge crisis here when it comes to economic sort of activity, youth unemployment, and how are you guys positioning to create a multiplier effect in terms of impact around the fund?
So if I can just comment on that. The first thing we have to do is educate, because many people, most people in this argument, don't know how beneficial cannabis can be. In fact, that we can food, we can feed, we can clothe, we can house, we can heal people with this plant. So the first step is education. In fact, one of the companies that we are looking at in terms of a qualifying company is an education plan. So that would be the first step. And then also in terms of engaging with government so that we get the right legislation that enables an industry as quickly as possible. And is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I'm engaging extensively with government around this, and there's the good and bad. I don't think it's any different to any other part of our government. Our policies seem to be correct. Our implementation is at times dismal. It's a reality of where we live right now. But firstly, when you start with the cannabis industry on a global level, it's been built with your partners, Paul Rosen, Steve D'Angelo from Global Go. They're trying to create a new kind of industry. Industry is based on sharing values, on building from the bottom. It's not an exploitative kind of industry. Deeply embedded is environmental issues, save the planet, that kind of stuff. South African perspective, well, let me talk about Zimbabwe, for example. They built an industry that want to earn foreign exchange. That's their objective. Lesotho, pretty much, you walk into the office, you write a check. I'm not being facetious here, but you get your license, you go and build it. South Africa's got a completely different set of objectives, which has got to be job creation, rural economic development, poverty alleviation, transformation. And I think this industry is, again, perfectly suited to deliver on all of those. And government is more than committed to it. Whether they're implementing is a separate question. The President Ramaphosa announced in the Solar speech last year, which seems like 10 years ago now, it's a lot of water's gone under the bridge in the last 12 months, about the inclusion of small farmers. The premiers, almost to the man or woman, have announced that their province is 100% committed to cannabis. It's got all the elements. It's got rural economic development. It's based in agriculture. One of the only sectors in our country that actually performed during COVID. There's a lot of money going into job creation. There's a lot of thinking going into food security. So I think we are perfectly aligned. As Silverleaf Investments, we've got to understand one thing. We're taking money from investors to provide a return to investors. We are not the government. However, we've got policies and we will push them in terms of economic transformation. We've got a foundation that we can use. We're working with training partners, and we would love to co-invest maybe with some government funds. So there's a misconception in the industry where some people look at us as investors in the industry and say, you must fund small farmers. Sorry, we can't do that. We are not the government. Our priority is to protect our investors and deliver returns. It does not mean we don't invest with a conscience and we don't understand the social issues. In fact, there's somebody in the audience here from an impact fund who very focused on social deliverables, and we could partner with them in the audience. So I think we are very much aligned with government objectives and the imperatives that drive our society. We have to operate in South Africa, and we must hold our head high, and our country must be proud of this industry, and I think they will. It's deeply embedded in the illicit industry. We have to include the small Transkei farmer who's been farming cannabis for the last 10 years by bringing them into the industry. We mustn't go after them with the police. We've got to stop our police arresting somebody The guy can smoke, but it's for private use, no problem. But a guy wants to earn some money, suddenly he gets arrested. You know, we've got to stop this stuff. We've got to embrace this industry for the benefit of all our people.
Definitely. You've touched on the 12J structure and the rationale for using it. Can you unpack the process for an investor? So if I'm putting my hand up, I'm saying this is brilliant, I want to be part of this fund. What's the process that happens from today in terms of getting the money into the fund? You touched on some of the tax benefits, and so what does that look like from a process perspective? And how does for example, how does the reporting work from them looking to have an idea of what you're investing in, and sort of engagement with the fund once an investment has been made?
So the first thing to do is, if you're interested, email us, invest@silverleaf.co.za. You're going to get on the other end our wonderful colleague Daryl. He's going to respond to you, and we're going to engage. We will attend the meetings, and we will then get rid of any fears or unknowns. Okay, so we're open to engagement. You can call us directly. We kind of are not shy about making our details public. Then, before the last week of February, go onto our website. You can download the brochure if you want to read more. Download the prospectus. It's I can't remember, Jeff, how long. It's an 80-page document. It's a good luck. You can read it. It's got all the legal stuff. Make your investment decision. Prepare your FICA documentation. Fill in the application form, and make sure you pay before the end of the tax year. You'll then be issued with a certificate. Okay. You'll be on our database. We will then, I think, for the first 3 weeks of March, we're going to then take stock, and we're going to put a whole lot of processes in place. We've got a little bit of internal work to do in terms of vetting qualifying companies. I mean, Cliff and I are getting bombarded, but anyway, we've got to get the process. It's got to be very formal, and then we will start engaging to our base on where we are. Obviously, if we make an investment, we'll go public with that, and then we'll start the full-on engagement process. It's my first time in a 12J fund, but I've watched Grovest and Jeff at work, and there is an active engagement process. There's emails, there's newsletters, there are obviously AGMs, and there are all the corporate governance steps that will be followed. So, we take our guidance from Grovest. They've done it before. They're managing multiple funds, so I can assure you we will be engaging with the market. Our next objective is August, where we're doing a second raise, so we're going to go on a whole marketing drive before that.
Yeah, if I can just bump into your side of the table. It is as simple as going onto our website and clicking the button invest, filling out the form, and from there it's step by step, and the form will guide you, and we will contact you, and we'll make it dead easy for you to invest.
All those clicks are on the invitations. So go back to the emails, they're all there. It's just literally online.
Just in terms of their corporate governance, so Silverleaf Investments is a registered venture capital company, and we bring, as we said right up front from the start of the session, we bring the investment vehicle, the structure, and the professionalism to the industry to be a channel for investors to get involved, especially now where the time is perfect. It's at the ground level. We believe we're going to see the growth that we're seeing in Canada and the US that's coming.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Can you chat us through a little bit initiatives that are get you really excited about kind of getting started, and how those businesses are positioned? Obviously, I don't think you have to disclose names and so forth, but it'd be interesting to get a bit of a flavor of let's say the top opportunities that you guys are looking at the moment.
So you can cover the cultivation.
How much time have we got? Yeah, that's a very long answer. I'll go very quickly. There are people with licenses that need top-up funding. There are people without licenses who've invested a lot of money. They need the last bit of money to get over There are hemp operations that are hopefully, they had permits, they are now hoping for the new round of permits they've got already markets. Okay, so cultivation, very interesting area. Unfortunately, the ticket is normally quite big, so we'll probably co-invest because we, as I said, we limited to 20%. You move to the next stage, we're talking to some extraction companies, some are bringing in international kind of equipment, others are doing homegrown innovations. Then around that area, laboratories, exciting area, became a big bottleneck in America. There weren't enough laboratories. Just to touch on that, we go from an illicit industry with no quality control to a fully managed, regulated industry. And that requires steps, and laboratories are critical. Everything that comes out the ground must be tested. People only buy it with a certificate of authentication. You go further up the value chain. Well, I'll just talk about services and leave that further up the value chain to Cliff. Services, phenomenal numbers of services, from consulting through to nutrients, through to pest control. Compliance software is a very interesting area. Compliance, some people say cannabis is a compliance industry. The people we employ come from the computer programming industry, not from the other side of the road. So there are lots of industries. The one area, Cliff touched on it, there's a huge need to talk to everyone, investors, doctors, patients, the general public. There's a huge education and training. We've got to build this industry from the bottom. We've got to train people in basic cultivation. This is not just another crop. It's quite specific. And if you get into medical cultivation, it is actually highly technical. So there's training and education is one area that we think is really needed.
Then, like on the manufacturing side, just yesterday I was at a factory down in Johannesburg that's gearing up for production of edibles. So it's a big growth area, getting GMP, good manufacturing practice, gearing up to get their license. So there's lots of activity happening at the manufacturing level and on the retail side. So we've got 8 stores around the country, and there are lots of these cannabis emporiums popping up in health and wellness that are geared towards the plant. And also on the thing that Pierre touched on in terms, they call them DPCs or Dagga private clubs. I hate the word Dagga, but they're out there. And so those are being tested in court right now, and that could quite quickly become a real legal viable channel, which then morphs into or becomes the dispensary model. And that's what's happening in Barcelona and in Spain, is they've got these private clubs that people become members of. So that's a model. I think South Africa is going to get a hybrid between dispensary and private clubs, but we're waiting to see. But I think it's also imminent. So the next few months we'll know exactly the lay of the land. And at that stage, we'll have bedded down where we want to go. We do want to make acquisitions and investments more quickly.
Excellent. We've seen some groundbreaking developments in Europe and the UK cannabis industry. Last year, the European Commission judgment stated that cannabis will not be classified as a narcotic. So that was a debate that had been raging on for a very long time. The UK has now opened up its listed markets. So the London Stock Exchange is now listing cannabis companies. So the question from my perspective there is, where is South Africa? Where's South Africa going to start firstly start seeing conventional large investors coming into the space, which I think the fund is well positioned to sort of incubate and develop companies for those opportunities, and the listing environment. So as a means of these companies sort of really scaling or exiting. How do you see that evolving in sort of the next couple of years?
So that's a very good point. Because obviously, as investors, the question is always the exit. How do you exit these companies? Right? So there's really 3 options. There's trade sale, where companies are M&A activity. Then there's an MBO, management buyout, and then there's potential listing. So we do foresee those all 3 happening. And obviously, listed on Altex and there's cannabis listed funds in Africa. Yeah, wonderful.
Talking more about the market, I did an exercise the other day. I think about 4 billion rands already been invested in South Africa. But we don't know about. It's friends and family, and then there are these boutique venture capital companies that have taken very strategic investments. But what we don't have yet are the banks, the big law firms, the big corporate players are not in it yet. And I think a lot of them are waiting for some legal issues to be cleared up. There's risk questions for some of the banks, for example. But we're engaging with a lot of venture capital companies, and they are watching this space like a hawk. I don't. That's your space, so you would bring this out. But I don't think there's a venture capital in this country that's not looking at cannabis. They may not. So I see a very significant development is Silverleaf, because they're going to be watching us like a hawk. They're going to be saying, "Oh, okay." I think some of them may go. We'll give you a little bit. We'll give them a little bit of comfort because we've got more knowledge and we've got, it's registered in terms of all the corporate governance stuff. So I think there's a lot of activity happening under the radar, and there's a lot of people scanning the horizon. So I think we're going to see a tremendous boost. And this year it's going to take off. That's my personal opinion.
Excellent. I think we're running out of time. Are there any questions from the floor that we need to take?
So just elaborate a bit on the fee structure.
Sorry?
Fee structure.
Fee structure, yeah. Okay, so there's a 3% raising fee and then a 2.5% management fee.
Is that 2.5% on capital deployed, or it takes you 6 months to deploy cash into investments?
No, it's on capital raised.
On capital
raised.
And is there a benchmark against that?
Jeff, are you?
Yeah, so for the first 2 years, it is 2.5% on capital raise, and thereafter it's 2.5% on the valuation. Well, the company's evaluation is then audited by a third party and then audited by company auditors. And how are those funds paid? Because the capital is pretty deployed. No, so it's only on exit of it's only on exit. So where the performance, but then 2%, 2.5% management you get to pay annually. There's always, you will never ever deploy 100% of the funds, because you always keep some dry capital available for follow-on rounds or whatever.
If there's anybody on Zoom who couldn't hear that, please send us a question. We'll respond to you. Just to summarize, 2.5% on capital raised and 2.5%, 3% of
So 2.5% management fee and 3% on capital raised once.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions?
The regulatory environment seems to be the biggest thing. What is the roadmap that governments kind of put in place to create that ecosystem or the enabling environment?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this. I'm going to go very quickly, and we can elaborate on it. So the private use model, the Constitutional Court has laid down. We're waiting for the government to pass the cannabis bill to say what are those limits. Okay, there was a deadline for the 18th of September last year. They didn't do it, so we're waiting for government there. And then we got the Hayes Club court case, which may just unravel that a whole lot. But we say adult use down the line. In terms of medical cultivation, it's clear. It's a Section 22 license. You go to SAPRA, you pass the criteria, you get your license, you trade. In terms of hemp, it's completely unclear, as I spoke about, but there's legislation being drafted right now. And it should be public from the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development within 2 weeks. There's some grey areas there. Where does cultivation for CBD or where does cultivation for smokable hemp fall in? And there's a bit of confusion, I think, about building legislation based on end use. But it's a little bit grey in that area, because agriculture, I'm going to say it's agricultural crop. It should be treated like a crop. SAPRA is saying if it's got a medical end use, even wellness, it's got to come through them. We're not quite sure, so we're waiting for a little bit of clarity on that. In terms of retail, we've got our clear legislation now in terms of CBD levels. So THC, in terms of retail at this point, it still needs to unravel.
Yeah, CBD is deemed to be Schedule 0, meaning it's like banana or biscuit, it can be sold anywhere. If it's under 600 milligrams, okay? If it's above 600 milligrams, it's Schedule 4, which means you need a script. THC is Schedule 6, so that means actually an original script to be handed over. But there are no registered products yet on the shelves, but the framework is there. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Please join us for a coffee afterwards.
And feel free to ask questions as they arise.
Thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks. All right.